Manchester City 0, Tottenham Hotspur 2. Say it again and let it sink in. Manchester City 0. At the Etihad. Against a side with a brand new manager, a patched up midfield, a rotating front line that still feels like it's figuring out who's in charge of the aux cord, and somehow they come away with not just a win, but a clean sheet. A clean sheet against City. That's like keeping soup in a sieve. Let's get this out of the way. It didn't look real. It looked like one of those games where you leave the pub mid-match because you're sure City are going to turn it around, and then you check your phone later and see the score and think, surely that's a typo. Surely Trafford didn't just gift-wrap the second goal like a panicked Secret Santa. Surely Pep didn't spend the last 10 minutes of the first half squinting at his midfield like it had been replaced by wax statues. But that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And it started with a match that simmered with weirdness. There was a kind of humming tension in the first half, the kind you feel when two dogs size each other up at the park, one of them twitchy, overconfident, all muscle memory swagger, and the other just watching, waiting. A little too calm for comfort. Spurs were the calm ones. Manchester City were doing their usual, playing the ball, owning the midfield, pinning Tottenham back like a piece of wet laundry. And for 20, maybe 30 minutes, you could squint and say, yep, this is the normal broadcast. Nothing to see here. City looked like City. Rico Lewis floating into spaces like he was a magician's scarf. Reinders sliding passes between the lines. Haaland, well, more on him later. But then, it started to tilt. You know that point in a match where you feel the weight shift? The moment when one side realizes the other might not be bluffing? Spurs had that. A weird kind of alertness. Not cocky, not desperate, just clinical, measured. And when the first goal came, oh my God, it felt like a slap across the face with a velvet glove. It was Brennan Johnson. Of course it was. Brennan Chaos Merchant Johnson. The man who looks like he's permanently mid-sprint. Spurs broke like a dropped plate, sharp, fast, and in all directions. And there was Johnson, cutting through the middle like a hot knife through Manchester hope. The finish wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. What mattered was the movement. The calm in the chaos. It went in, and it was 1-0. And then, the whistle didn't go. The flag did go up initially. It was ruled off. Of course it was. This is football in the 21st century, where joy is always tempered by bureaucracy. But even the assistant seemed uncertain, like he was second-guessing himself in real time. And then came the review. The kind of VAR check where both sets of fans hold their breath for 2 minutes and then forget how to breathe when it's over. Goal given. 1-0 Spurs. And from that moment, you could almost feel the blood pressure spike in the stadium. But let's talk about the moment that defined this match. James Trafford, a man with the composure of a birthday balloon in a wind tunnel. The second goal, wow. You could hear the sound of thousands of jaws hitting the floor at once. The ball's at his feet, City trying to play out, because of course they are. It's written into their DNA at this point. But Trafford doesn't see Sarr. Or he does, but chooses to ignore him like a red flag on a dating app. What follows is not so much a mistake as it is a performance art piece. Sarr steals in. Richarlison gets involved. The ball pinballs toward Joao Palhinha, and the man who's built to break legs in midfield suddenly looks like a composed striker from the edge of the box. He side-foots it home. 2-0. Right before the break. Now, imagine being Pep Guardiola. You've gone from your team smothering opponents like a weighted blanket to watching James Trafford audition for a blooper reel that's going to live on the internet forever. Imagine the speech he must have given in the dressing room. I'm pretty sure he invented new words for how angry he was. So the second half. You think, City have to respond. Rodri's warming up, Foden's stripping off. The cavalry is coming. But Spurs, they didn't care. Spurs looked like the cool older sibling who's been through worse. They were playing with a kind of eerie serenity, the way some people handle turbulence on a plane while others are bracing for impact. Bentancur and Palhinha were everywhere, sometimes physically, sometimes just spiritually looming like bouncers at a nightclub. Rodri comes on and looks a yard off. Foden tries to dance through midfield and gets mugged by Sarr. Haaland gets shut down like a dodgy stream. And the Etihad, that cathedral of goals and certainties, started to sound like a museum. Polite, quiet, nervous. There was no grand fight back. No siege. City didn't even look like they were simmering. They just fizzled. Yes, there were moments. Across here, a half chance there. But nothing that made you think a goal was inevitable. Spurs, to their credit, weren't just holding on. They were counterattacking with real venom. Solanke comes on, Odobert gets involved, and suddenly it looks like they might make it 3. This isn't how these matches are supposed to go. Not in this stadium. Not against this team. But that's the surreal thing. It didn't even feel like an upset. It felt like a revelation. Spurs didn't steal anything. They took it, deliberately, like they had a blueprint and executed it with surgical focus. And the ending? Just as strange. The game drifted. No dramatic finale, no deflected goal, just an increasingly disjointed City side trying to force open a door that Spurs had welded shut. You could hear the away fans before the final whistle. Manchester City, it's happened again. It has. Again. What a start for Thomas Frank. What a cold splash of reality for Manchester City. And we're not even into the wild part yet. You want to talk about individual performances? You want to wade through the wreckage of Manchester City's afternoon and the meticulous little sculptures Tottenham built in its ruins? All right then, let's open the door. Let's turn on the light. Let's look the monster in the face. James Trafford. My poor, sweet summer child. This wasn't a debut, it was an audition for the role of Haunted House Resident Number 1. He didn't just make a mistake. He made a public art installation of one. The kind of mistake that gets written into training manuals. I don't want to be cruel. He's young. He'll learn. He has a promising career ahead of him, probably in therapy. But this game? This one? It's going to follow him like a cursed necklace. The hesitation, the pass, the wide-eyed realization that he had manifested his own doom. And the worst part? Ederson was on the bench, just watching, probably blinking very slowly. Now, João Palhinha. Palhinha was a wall with legs, a Portuguese statue that came to life and decided to bulldoze everything in sight. Every time a City player tried to do something clever, there he was, like the ghost of bad decisions past. And when he got his goal, from Trafford's Christmas gift, he didn't lash it, or panic, or balloon it into the clouds. No, he just slotted it. Calm as you like. He looked like the only man in the stadium who had expected that ball to come to him. Honestly, I think he might have cursed Trafford in the tunnel. And how about Brennan Johnson? There's something about the way he runs. It's like he's perpetually escaping something. A bee, a deadline, a boring conversation. But give him space, and he'll eat it like candy. That goal, the control, the finish, the ruthless simplicity of it, that was Brennan distilled. He's the kind of player who looks like he just sprints and vibes, but this game showed a new layer. Timing, awareness, a kind of electric restraint. Also, let's give some flowers to the people behind the camera on that VAR check, because if that one didn't count, this entire podcast would have had a very different, more shouty tone. Richarlison, well, he was doing Richarlison things. Fighting with ghosts, throwing elbows at shadows. At one point, I think he had beef with gravity. But he was involved, he never disappeared. And when the ball bounced awkwardly in the build-up to Palhinha's goal, he fought for it. That's his whole deal. He doesn't care if he's elegant, he wants to be loud. And in a game like this, that energy mattered. Mohamed Kudus was a paradox. He didn't score, didn't assist, didn't headline. But if you watch closely, you'd see him threading the tempo together like a tailor working in the background. His off-ball movement was ridiculous. He carried Spurs forward when they were pinned and drew fouls when they needed a breath. He was the invisible scaffolding holding up a very loud building. If this were a heist movie, Kudus is the guy in the van, hacking the doors open while everyone else is shouting. And then there was Cristian Romero. Somewhere in the first half, he cracked the Haaland code, and then he just turned it off. Haaland, the Nordic battering ram, the Premier League's final boss, the player whose mere presence causes goalkeepers to age 10 years per game. And Romero just pocketed him like a receipt. He played the role of tormentor, babysitter, and wall all at once. There were moments Haaland didn't even look interested anymore, like he'd wandered into the wrong building and didn't know how to leave. Vicario, in goal, had one major job, and he did it early. That save from Marmoush in the first half, that was the crack in the armor. The moment when you felt like, wait, Spurs believe. If that goes in, the story might have bent the other way, but it didn't. and Vicario stood firm. From then on, he was unflappable. You could have asked him to do a Sudoku mid-game, and he probably would have obliged. Van de Ven and Spence, full credit here. These are not the names you plaster across billboards. These are not glamorous viral players. But Van de Ven devoured space. Anytime City tried to isolate a wing or break through wide, he was there. Clean, ruthless, a quiet assassin. And Spence, who's been through more London clubs than a night bus, looked like he belonged. He wasn't perfect, but he played like a man with something to prove. And against Manchester City, that's half the battle. Let's pivot to City. You can cover your ears if you want. Reinders looked good last week. This week, he looked like he'd left his internal compass at home. He couldn't find the angles, couldn't link with the forward line, and was constantly swallowed by Tottenham's midfield meat grinder. Rico Lewis did his best. Honestly, it's hard to fault a guy when your entire shape is collapsing like a dying star. He floated in and out of the midfield, tried to connect with Bob and Cherky, but nothing stuck. There was too much static. No rhythm. It felt like watching a talented kid perform Shakespeare in a nightclub. Speaking of Bob and Cherky, let's just say they'll have better days. Cherky had one or two slick touches, but mostly floated on the periphery like he was allergic to responsibility. Bob tried to get involved, but was eaten alive by Palhinha every time he ventured too close to the center circle. Rodri and Foden came on, and that should have meant something. It usually does. But even their presence felt diluted. Rodri was off the pace, dragged into a midfield battle that was already lost. And Foden, for all his footwork and flashes, kept looking up and seeing nothing. No openings, no inspiration, just white shirts where there should have been blue opportunities. Haaland, though, man, what do you even say? It's weird to see him this human. It's like seeing a lion at the zoo just lying down, licking its paw, bored out of its skull. He had a header in stoppage time, wild and over, and that was it. Romero and Van de Ven turned the most terrifying striker in Europe into an exhausted decoy. And that's the thing. It wasn't just a poor performance from City. It was a void. No ideas, no leadership, no spark. Guardiola's bench was a war chest, and even when he opened it, it felt like reaching into a bag of air. Meanwhile, on the other touchline, Thomas Frank might have sipped from the fountain of tactical clarity. You could feel his fingerprints on this match. The balance, the press, the composure. Spurs didn't play like underdogs. They played like problem solvers. They came with a plan and stuck to it like duct tape. It's hard to overstate how big this result is. Not just because it's Manchester City, not just because it's away, but because it felt earned, intentional. And when the whistle blew and the chants rang out, we are top of the league. It didn't even feel like banter. It felt like a warning. This has been Across the Pitch, over and out.